Ready to go on?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:35. First up is the call to order with the just did. Second up, roll call.
Commissioner Steve Ruyle,
Here.
Commissioner Luke Sackett,
Here.
Commissioner Sean Fitzgerald,
Here.
Commissioner Dan Kay, Chair Ryan Jones.
Here. Next up, approval of November 14th, 2022 minutes. Did everyone have a chance to look at them?
Approval of the November 14th, 2022 meeting minutes.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Need to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 4, comments from citizens. This is the time for anyone to address the planning commission on matters that are not on the agenda. Seeing none, we move on to new business. Item A, elect a new chairperson. Who's got a burning desire to do this? Fine. You've done a great job. I guess I can do it.
I move that we re-elect Ryan Jones for the
It's been properly moved that I keep doing this. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Let's see, item B, public hearing file number 2210-01 PUD and 2210-02 sub Amity Oaks Plan Unit Development at 1204 Oak Street, in Amity, tax block R5429 AC 00700 9.8 acres. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're holding the public hearing regarding application number 2210-01 PUD and 2210-02 SPD for community home builders at 1204 Oak Street in Amity, tax lot R5429 AC 00700. This is a quasi judicial decision. Unlike in legislative hearing where personal opinion may come into play, quasi judicial rulings must be grounded in the relevant code and other approval criteria. If the application meets the code and other approval criteria of the city, the planning commission must approve it. The hearing will proceed as follows. We will first address some preliminary legal matters. Then staff will make a presentation introducing the application that is before us. Then the applicant will have the opportunity to present their application. Then members of the audience will be given the opportunity to speak. Finally, there will be time for rebuttal by the applicant. I now call to order the public hearing. I will now cover the preliminary legal matters. Legal matters include burden of proof criteria and appeal rights. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the City of Amity's Development Code, comprehensive plan, and any other applicable municipal code provisions and the Oregon statewide planning goals. The applicable criteria will be reviewed in the staff report. All testimony and evidence speakers give us must concern the approval criteria described in the staff report or other criteria in the development code or comprehensive plan that the person testifying believes should apply to the decision. If your testimony would be repetitious, but you would like the opportunity to appeal the decision, you must sign and submit a public testimony sheet before the hearing is closed by the chair. Only those who have appeared before the commission in person or in writing have standing to appeal this item to the city council. Before the conclusion of the first public evidentiary hearing on this application, any participant may request a continuance or ask that the record be left open to present additional information that is within the scope of the hearing. If there is a request, the decision maker will either continue the public hearing by scheduling a date to finish the hearing, continuance, or leave the record open for at least 7 days for additional written evidence, argument, or testimony. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence with sufficient detail will give the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue means that no appeal may be made to the state land use board of appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail will allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, includes an action for damages in circuit court. Declarations. Before we have the staff report, I will ask a few questions to the members of the commission and then of the audience. Does any member of the commission wish to declare a potential or active conflict of interest or bias? None. Does any member of the commission wish to report any site visits or ex parte contacts? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the planning commission to hear this matter? Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the impartiality or ex parte disclosures of any member of the planning commission? That concludes legal matters. Testimony tonight will be in the following order. First, presentation of the staff report. Second, presentation of the applicant. Third, presentation of the proponents. Fourth, presentation of the opponents. Fifth, testimony of neutral parties, including government bodies. Sixth, rebuttal by the applicant limited to issues raised during public testimony. We'll proceed to the staff presentation by a city planner, Holly Byron.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I apologize for the lack of microphone. I'll do my best to project this evening. My name is Holly Byram and I work for the Big-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. I serve as the contract city planner for Amity and a couple other cities in Marion and Yamhill counties. My job is to help the planning commission understand what standards and policies they need to follow when they're making decisions on land use applications. So tonight's public hearing is actually about 2 land use applications. The first is a subdivision, and that's an application that makes 4 or more lots. And the second is a planned unit development, or a PUD. And that is an application that you apply basically with the subdivision to give you a little more flexibility in how you lay out a development. And so tonight's application was submitted by Community Home Builders, which is an organization out of McMinnville. And I'll let the applicant tell you a little more about who they are and what they do. They're represented here this evening. They have a planning consultant. What they're proposing to do, there is a property at the southern end of Oak Street here in Amity. It's about 9.7 acres. It's zoned for low density residential development. And they're proposing to develop 36 residential units on that property. And the way that the neighborhood is laid out would be to observe where the floodplain from Ash Swale sits to avoid any development within the floodplain. And that floodplain area would be reserved as open space. Within that development, they would also have a small park and a separate open space area, which is a stormwater swale. We'll get into a little more detail there. I need to tell you the criteria that apply to this application. And those are from the Amity Development Code, section 2.101, which is the R1 zone. Section 2.111, the floodplain management. 2.200, which is the general development standards. 2.302, planned unit developments. 2.208, development standards for land divisions. 3.109, subdivisions and PUDs. and 3.112 traffic studies. It's a lot of information. The staff report that we gave to the Planning Commission is a lot of information. I trust that they've skimmed it, they've kind of absorbed some of the most important pieces. My goal tonight is to give a summary of that, and then if we need to go back and drill down and look at anything in more detail, we can do that. I don't want anyone to fall asleep here this evening. So subdivisions and PUDs are both type 2 applications. That means that we have a public hearing here in front of the Planning Commission, and tonight the Planning Commission could make the final decision, or they could continue the public hearing. So public notice was mailed to the neighbors, and it was also published in the newspaper at least 20 days prior to the public hearing. A little bit of background about this property. This property was rezoned from agricultural holding to R1 residential a couple years ago, and the purpose for that was to prepare it for residential development. In the staff report, I've included a couple maps, and that shows the vicinity of where the property is, an aerial photo of what it looks like today. It is vacant, undeveloped. And I've also included the floodplain map. Approximately 30% of this property is located within the floodplain of Ash Swale. And then on page 4 of the staff report is the proposed layout of the neighborhood. Of the 36 lots proposed, 4 of those would take access from Oak Street, and the remaining would take access from a brand new street called Amity Oaks Lane. There would also be a secondary street, which would be an emergency access. It would not be traveled by vehicles. It would have bollards, removable bollards for fire department access if they needed it. So at the end of Amity Oaks Lane would be a fire department hammerhead turnaround. The applicant has provided a project summary here on page 6 for you. And then the review criteria starts on page 7 for the Planning Commission. The first piece of criteria is from the R1 zone. The R1 zone is intended for low density residential development that has a density range of between 4 units and 6 units per acre. The development code defines density as gross acre. And so it's important to keep that in mind as we move forward thinking about the density here. At the bottom of page 7, we've included the planned unit development criteria. And just to remind everyone, we don't do a lot of these applications in Amity, and so planned unit developments really are designed to give flexibility to a development. It's designed or intended to give a better product than what you get in a conventional subdivision. It's designed to consider special areas such as natural resources, natural hazards, steep slopes, floodplains, view sheds. So it's intended to work around these features. And so this property is a very good application for a PUD. Included on, starting on page 8, I've included some language from the Amity Comprehensive Plan. And this is your long-term vision document that talks about what's important to the city of Amity. And included in this comprehensive plan, there's some language about the value of natural hazards, natural resources, and view sheds. And so it's important to keep this in mind. When we consider development and applications in Amity, we need to balance the long-term obligation the city has to provide housing land with preserving these areas that are not suitable for development. And that's why PUD is a good tool, put development where it belongs and keep it out of the floodplain and the steep slopes. Okay, so starting on page 11 here is the development requirements for PUDs. PUDs allow for residential development, but they can also allow for commercial development in a zone that's not otherwise allowing commercial development. This application does not propose any commercial development. It's housing only, plus a park and open space. The first criteria is about site adaptation. Does this plan, this development, assure that natural and unique features of the land are preserved? In this case, yes. The intent of the development is to keep all housing outside of the 100-year floodplain. On page 12, you'll see a map, and that's the existing conditions. You can see that the west side of the property is sloped. Ash swale is on the south and west sides of the property. B is about lot arrangement, and the intent here is to have housing as close to open space areas as possible. In this case, because of the configuration of ash swale, not all houses are within 200 feet of the open space, but they are within 300 feet of the open space. So the development layout does meet the intent of easy access, walking access to that open space. Criteria C is about the density of development. So keep in mind the underlying R1 zone allows a density of between 4 units and 6 units per acre, per gross acre. So if there were no obstacles on this property, if there were no floodplain or no slopes, you could potentially see between 39 and 58 units. The PUD code language does not allow quite so many. It has a different equation here. And so that is a calculation based upon net area. There's an assumption that you're going to use some of this area for streets. So the consideration there, that calculation allows up to 49 units for this project. Again, the applicant is proposing 36 units. So by density, they are under their maximum allowed and not even to the minimum allowed for the gross acreage there in that zone.
I do want to wait for questions until you're done.
Absolutely. Now, with clarification?
Well, and I might be jumping the gun, but the chart that you had on page 15, the development standard is 7,000 square feet.
Yes.
And the design alternative is 3,500 square feet. Now, is that an average or is that per lot? Because when I look, maybe I'm just reading it wrong, but when I looked at the plot map, some of the lots are different sizes.
Yeah. So we'll get down to that in just a moment.
Okay.
Here. I've noted your question.
Okay.
So the next standard on page 13 is about open space. The PUD code requires at least 20% of the project is in open space or outdoor recreation area. The applicant is proposing more than the 20% that's required. Is actually closer to almost 40% of the gross area. So that is the entire floodplain area. The PUD language does not go so far as to require that public access is available for that open space, simply that the open space is present within the PUD development. There is a small park provided or proposed within that neighborhood. My understanding is both the park and the trail through the open space area would be accessible to residents of the neighborhood. And then a homeowners association and HOA would maintain those areas. The applicant has approached the city about dedicating tract C, which is the large floodplain open space, to the city. And while that may not be the authority of the planning commission to accept that dedication, as a condition of approval within the staff report suggests that if the city were to take ownership of that land, the applicant has agreed that the HOA would be responsible for the long-term maintenance of that tract. So the mowing of that tract to ensure there's no fire hazard, for example. On page 15 is about structure setback provisions. Okay, so earlier I mentioned that PUDs allow for flexibility. The applicant has provided us a list of the standards that they would like special considerations to for flexibility. And some of those include the minimum lot area, the minimum yard setbacks along a street, the minimum lot width at the building line, lot coverage, and then the width to depth ratios on the lots. So in the base R1 zone, the minimum lot size is 7,000 square feet. And you'll note that there's an inverse relationship between the minimum lot size and then the density of the development. So in order to get a higher density, you need to reduce the lot size, for example. So in this case, the applicant is requesting to reduce the lot size from that 7,000 square foot minimum to a 3,500 square foot minimum. And the reason being to provide additional housing for the community and in consideration of the access to open space. So I've included that table there in the staff report there. And then we'll come back to your question here at the end, Commissioner. At the page 16, we get into access management, and we'll touch back on that. Off-street parking. Parking is often an issue that a lot of people have concerns about, so I want to make sure and touch on this. The Amity Development Code requires that all dwelling units have at least 2 off-street parking spaces. So in this case, what's proposed is every dwelling unit would have a 2-car driveway and a 2-car garage. The applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. So my understanding is that there would be between 2 and 4 off-street parking spaces per house. So that does meet the standard. And then there would be some on-street parking as well. I'm going to skip to the bottom of page 16. A homeowners association is required for a PUD. That is a mandatory participation by all the future homeowners there, and they are required to pay dues. That HOA could not be dissolved, and none of the open space could be disposed of without a public hearing in front of the planning commission and a vote of the city council. So if there are concerns about the long-term sustainability of the HOA, it would really have to be a decision of the city to let them go. So we'll come back to that as well. Page 17 is where we get into the general development standards. Most cities require development to pay for itself. That means that the developers have to pay for the streets, the water connections, the sewer connections, the storm connections, the street lights, the fire hydrants, the stormwater swales. The developer is responsible for paying for their own. And so that is what this section of the staff report is about. Let's see, the first part is about streets. We all know that South Oak Street is narrow. And it's not just the pavement that's narrow, it's actually the right of way that's narrow as well. So this is the collector level street, which means it should be 66 feet wide, and that right of way is only 50. And so the developer is going to be responsible for dedicating additional street width there, an extra 8 feet on their side of the center line. And then they're responsible for paving their own sidewalk, curbs, gutters, and then the full street pavement width. That's 3/4 width. That just means they don't do the sidewalk on the other side of the pavement. The new Amity Oaks Lane is the local street. That means it's a 60-foot right of way with a 34-foot pavement width, and they will be developing that to the full standard as well. So there's no exceptions requested for street width or right of way width here. The applicant will be doing the full requirement there. Only one side of the new Amity Oaks Lane would have parking on it. However, you need to make sure that the fire department can get their access into there. They need a minimum 26 feet width to get their fire apparatus in and out of Amity Oaks Lane. Okay, I'm down to page 21 here. Let's see, I'll skip over some here. Again, there's only one private street proposed, and that's in tract A. That's the emergency access. It's not open to vehicles except for emergency rigs through a Knox box lock on those bollards. My understanding is pedestrian and bicycle traffic can go through there, no problem. Okay, let's get down to talked about off-street parking and levy. So in terms of utilities, storm drainage is the first one we'll talk about. What the applicant proposes to do with stormwater is to route it to a new stormwater basin at the southern end of the development. That's enclosed in tract B. So they would be responsible for their own stormwater there. In terms of other utilities, there's an existing 8-inch water line in Oak Street. The applicant would bring that through Amity Oaks Lane and then loop it back through tract A, the emergency access, so that we have a loop. And then in terms of sewer, same thing, there's an 8-inch sewer in Oak. They would bring it down Amity Oaks Lane and move it back through the emergency access. And they would be responsible for all of those costs. In terms of streetlights, they are shown on the plan. The hydrants are shown on the plan. In terms of private utilities, there's a standard 5-foot utility easement along the frontage of all the new lots. Okay, the planning commission probably noted there's a lot of redundancy in some of these code sections. I'm going to skip over the redundancies here. Access. Access is on page 27. Land division standards require that we don't landlock a parcel. If you're making a new property, it has to have access to a public street or somehow take access through an easement. In this case, all the new lots have access to the new public street. There are a couple of flag lots proposed. That means you have a narrow strip that opens up wider. The house is in the back down the driveway. So in this case, we have a couple of pairs of flag lots. So they're side by side and they share a driveway. And so those flag lots would be required to have a shared access, utilities, and maintenance agreement between those two houses. That means that they agree to let each other pass through, to let their utilities through, and they will participate equally in maintaining those driveways. All right, let's see. Moving along here. In terms of pedestrian facilities, there will be sidewalks on the new street in the neighborhood. Okay, so on page, let's move on to the flood management section that's on page 34. So all cities and Oregons have flood management language, and this ensures that we are not developing in the floodplain in a manner that would either prove harmful to life or property, and also in a manner that wouldn't impact our downstream neighbors. So in Amity, there's some language in your development code about what can and cannot be done in the floodplain. What we do when we're looking for the floodplain is we use FEMA's firm maps, so their insurance rate maps, and that gives us a good idea of where the floodplain is. But any property owner can hire a surveyor to survey out the actual elevation and then to submit to essentially correct that. And so in this case, the applicant has a very slight variation that they will be submitting a letter of map amendment to correct where the actual floodline is. That's a standard condition of approval that needs to be done before we can plat this subdivision. At this time, there's no building permit submitted, so we don't need to look at the floor elevations of any of the proposed houses. But that will be done at the time of building permit. Okay, and then the last section here on page 37 of the staff report is about traffic studies. The Amity Development Code tells the city engineer when a traffic study can be required. And in this case, a traffic impact analysis was provided. And this was an analysis that was actually performed back in 2020. Just for a little bit of history here, the property owner a couple years ago initiated the conversation with city staff. We sat down, we had a pre-application conference. We started talking through all the different standards And so the city staff have been in conversation with the applicant since 2019. So in 2020 is when they did their traffic study. And so what they did was they provided a hypothetical number of 35 residential lots. What kind of traffic would this generate based upon the 2020 traffic projected forward to the year 2022, which is when they were imagining that they could complete construction. And so they looked at the traffic numbers at a couple different intersections, one of them being Church and Oak, and the other one being Nursery and Oak. And they projected how many peak hour trips, so rush hour trips, they would see at those intersections. And then they have a level of service rating. Generally, level of service, or LOS, A through D is acceptable, and E and F are failing. That means you're waiting too long at that intersection and mitigation is going to be necessary. In this case, the intersections performed well. I have the findings there in the report there. Perhaps the applicant and or our city engineer can talk about this in a little more detail, but the intersections performed without any kind of mitigation required. And so they concluded that the proposed subdivision can be approved with no mitigation. So on page 38 is where we began the staff recommendation and conclusions. Generally, the proposed PUD does comply with Amity's adopted standards, with the caveat that the PUDs allow flexibility. And so there are recommended conditions of approval, as there always are for land use approvals. Those start on page 39. They're fairly lengthy, but again, these are important. When we have conditions of approval on development applications, these are what we look to before we allow them to begin construction, before we allow them to record a subdivision plan, before we allow them to have building permits, and before we allow them to have final occupancy. At each of those stages, there are conditions of approval that need to be met by the applicant. And so that's the teeth that the city has, ensuring that the developers follow the rules. First use conditions of approval are very standard here. The developer needs to comply with all the adopted standards in the Amity Public Works Design Standards. They're responsible for the cost of all those improvements. Those improvements need to be completed before they plat. Let's see, they need to comply with the city engineer comments. They need to have fire department approval. They need to have that letter of map amendment completed. During the staff review, we reach out to all the city departments and then also partner agencies. So we're talking police and fire and ODOT. In this case, the Department of State Lands. They provided comments and they just have rules about what needs to be done if the applicant were to work in that special flood hazard area. Let's see. We already talked about how they're responsible for the 3/4 width improvements on Oak Street. How there would be no parking along the west side of Amity Oaks Lane. The agreements on the flag lots. Those flag lots would also need no parking signage so the fire department can get in and out of those. But no hammerhead was required there because the length of those driveways is not 150 feet or more. We talked about tract A. The city needs an easement for those utilities. There'll be bollards there with a Knox box. Tract B is their stormwater basin. They have an ongoing maintenance responsibility there. The HOA does, and so they will need to sign an agreement with the city for that. That stormwater basin should likely be fenced depending upon the depth there. Let's see, tract P2 is where they have a small loop trail out into the open space. And the applicant has agreed that they would fence that and install signage to ensure that there's no public access to tract C, which is the open space area. Again, that large open space was not intended for public access at this time. In the future, if the city accepts the land donation, they can revisit that in the future, but as of now, there's no public access proposed to that. let's see. The city does require that we review the HOA bylaws and CCNRs prior to planning. So now I'm on, let's see, page 41, which is condition 22. Additional standard language there about planting and irrigation plan, landscaping installation, clear vision areas, signage, park lighting. If there's any lighting used in the park, we need to make sure it's not shining onto the abutting houses, it's just on the park there. We need to make sure the garbage recycling company can get in and out okay. Presumably they're fine, if the fire apparatus is fine. Building permits are issued by the county in partnership with the city. Monuments, benchmarks, okay. So the rest is standard language here. The approval timeline for the subdivision and PUD is 1 year for a plat. The applicant could request more, but they have not yet. And then there are extensions available if they come back to the city to request that. And then there are rules about if they want to change their PUD, how they go about doing that. Staff's recommendation is on the bottom of page 42. And that is ultimately to approve the concurrent applications subject to those recommended conditions of approval. Attached to those findings, Exhibit A is all the comments that we received. So you'll see the city engineers, the deputy state fire marshal, public works, city manager, ODOT, PGE, Yamhill County Public Works, ESL, so their comments were all there. And then in Exhibit B, we have the actual application itself, which is fairly lengthy. I know it's a lot of information. I'm happy to answer questions from the commission right now, or you can wait until I will hear from the applicants. Whichever you prefer.
Okay. Thank you, Holly.
Yeah.
Commission members, are there any brief clarifying questions of staff before we move on to the applicant's presentation?
Yeah, I had a question I had about the design alternative.
Yes.
It's basically half of what the development standard is.
Yes.
And it looks like from the overview that there are various lot sizes. Is that within the discretion of the developer, or are there any boundaries on that?
Yeah. So what the commissioner is referring to is the minimum lot size of the R1 zone is 7,000 square feet, and the developer is requesting the permission to go as low as 3,500 square feet for a lot. The lots that are proposed range between 3,500 and I believe it was 6,500 square feet. So they really have a range of sizes. They're just requesting to go that low where need be. But not all the lots are that small.
So kind of a follow-up to that, does the commission have the authority to say you can go this low, but only for X number of lots?
If you find that there is a reason that benefits the community to do so, you would need to make findings on, to support that. Yeah.
Without prejudging it, we would be in our authority to do that if we had reasons to do that.
You do have flexibility. If there are reasons, to support that, yeah.
I had a question about the green space.
Yes.
You stated that the green space was about 40% of this. And that's before they would dedicate track C to the city?
Yeah. So open space includes tract C, which is the floodplain, tract B, which is the stormwater swale, tract A, which is the emergency access, tract P1, which is the park, tract P2, which is the trail. So all of that is under the 40%, but only tract C would be dedicated to the city.
to take track C out.
Uh-huh.
I'm just not sure how you're able to calculate land that's going to be basically in somebody else's ownership
Right,
in the green space.
right.
And how, what percentage would that be? Because the part looks like it's not very big at all.
Right,
And then I don't know, like green space, I think green space is being able to be used by the people that are living in really small lots. And one of the tracks is the storm detention area.
right,
So it's not really a usable space.
right. So the way it's written, the development code doesn't require public access to open spaces because it inherently assumes that there's public benefit from open spaces. And those are the benefits in the comprehensive plan of natural resources, natural hazards, and view sheds. So there's public benefit in preventing flooding of these properties and other properties downstream.
But track C won't even be under the same ownership.
Right, so the PUD code does allow a developer to dedicate a park to the city if the city requests it. In this case, the city is not requesting it, but this shows us that the PUD code allows for dedication and still for that open space to be considered for approving the PUD. If that's helpful.
So if you, what percentage is track C that will be taken out? And basically, it's not even part of this, part of the land that you developed.
Right, it's set aside for the floodplain.
So what percentage is that? Do you have any idea?
I don't know, roughly 30% of the development, I would think.
I think it's 3.75 acres. Or was that the total?
We can have the applicant confirm that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. This is I'm gonna interject here this comment. These are the times we need to make notes for ourselves about if our code needs to be improved or strengthened. These are the notes we need to make. If we want open space to be a certain percentage accessible to the public, these are the times to make those notes. Definitely.
Any other questions for all? Okay, we'll continue to the applicant's presentation. Regarding public testimony tonight. Gotta have the applicant. Knock yourself out.
Good evening, planning commissioners. My name is Steve Cave, Cascadia Planning Development Services, and I'm representing the applicant tonight. My address is PO Box 1920, Silverton, Oregon 97381. Some of the comments I'll make are gonna follow up with what Holly has already presented. Staff has done a good job of looking through the code, seeing how this proposal meets the criteria for approval. But this is a special project in that it's a plan unit development. We don't see many of these in small communities, so it's important to take a closer look at what the code requires and what the applicant is proposing in this case. The purpose of a PUD, as stated in the Amity Code, is to provide housing opportunities not easily achieved by traditional lot development by allowing a creative approach, maintaining the same density for the R1 zone, while providing more efficient and desirable use of open space areas on the site. When applying the PUD standard, in this case, based on the site size, there's a required density of 33 units. The applicant's proposing 36. There's a maximum density that's allowed for the site of 49 units. So the applicant is proposing significantly less than what is allowed by code. In addition to the density standards, a PUD is required to set aside, as staff said, 20% of the site as common open space area. This area may be owned either by a public entity, and the code specifically states that, or it can be owned by a homeowners association. In this case, The applicant is proposing to dedicate that space to the city, so it would become public land. That land would still be counted as common open space as it's part of the initial PUD application. For the 9.7 acre site, approximately 84,000 square feet of common open space is required. The applicant is proposing to provide nearly 177,000 square feet common open space, more than double what's required. That common space that calculation does not include the water quality tract. These common open space areas include a pathway for viewing benches into the riparian area along Ash Swale, and a park with lawn areas and a children's play structure. The applicant is agreeable to providing ongoing maintenance for the tract A space. So it will be a common space area that will be owned by the city, but will be continued to be maintained by the property owner. The proposed transportation system improvements include a 3/4 street improvement along Oak Avenue. The applicant's providing an additional 8 feet of right of way. A 3/4 street improvement means the entire width that's required in pavement will be provided. In addition to a curb, a 4-foot planter strip, and 5-foot sidewalk, that's all meant to meet the collector street standards. The applicant, of course, is also proposing to install full street improvements for Amity Oaks Lane within the development, and to provide an emergency turnaround. A gravel access way is proposed between Amity Oaks Lane and Oak Avenue. As stated by staff, the traffic impact analysis, which was scoped with city staff input, was found that the Oak and Church Avenue intersection and the Oak Nursery Street intersections both can accommodate the proposed development, and no traffic signals at those locations are warranted. As required, public utilities will be extended with the proposed development. The city engineer has already taken a look at what's proposed and has determined that the existing sanitary sewer and water systems have the capacity to support this development. And the applicant is including a separate tract which will provide for detention of stormwater for this development before it's released into Ash Swale at the pre-development rate. When these lots are developed, additional property tax revenue is generated, and that revenue will be used to support the Amity School District, Amity Fire District, Park System, and contracted Amity Yamhill share of the services. The applicant and developer of this project is Community Home Builders. And just a little bit about their background. They're a private nonprofit organization that's been partnering with families and individuals to build their homes, provide them long-term economic stability, and to teach them home maintenance skills. These services are provided with the assistance of a number of partner agencies, including USDA, Department of Housing and Urban Development, CASA of Oregon, and the Housing Authority of Yamhill County. Community Home Builders has completed a number of successful projects in the Willamette Valley over the past 30 years, including in Lafayette, McMinnville, Sheridan, Jervis, Carlton, and Dayton. In Amity, they previously developed 22 homes in the Amity Meadows subdivision. I was going to present some images of their build projects to you. Unfortunately, we don't have that available for you, but they are attractive developments. The people that are building these developments have themselves invested in those locations, so they take pride in what they've built. We appreciate your review of this proposal. We believe this will increase the diversity of housing types in Amity and will allow home ownership to be attainable by more members of the community. The city staff report, as well as the applicant's narrative and exhibits, detail how the plan unit development meets the criteria for approval. We thank you for your consideration this evening, and myself and a few other members of the community home builders are here if you have any questions.
Commissioner, another question?
I had a quick question. The properties that are up against homes that are already there, will those setbacks, will those be reduced setback or setbacks that are required under the R1?
They're setbacks that are permitted under the plan unit development code. However, it's important to note that, and I couldn't show you a picture, but the applicant's intending to fully fence each of these backyards and side yards with side obscuring 6 foot tall fencing. So provide privacy for both the residents that are living there and for the adjacent neighbors.
That'd be the reduced setback.
Depending on how that lot's oriented. So it could be a rear yard, which is providing more of a setback versus a side yard.
And how many of those properties are we talking about?
Well, along the north property line, all the lots have rear yards, which are oriented towards the adjacent properties. So
Like 5 or 4 or 5?
five has a side yard. 8, 9, 13, and 14 on the north side have rear yards. 29, 33, 34, and 1 are buffered by that access way to adjacent properties. 26 is buffered by the access to the track D water quality facility. So 27 would have a reduced setback. And this diagram showing the setbacks, but not the actual house footprints. In your packet, there should have been some renderings that were included. Hopefully that was included in your packet that was submitted with this application. That shows what is envisioned as far as house footprints go. So there'd likely be more setback than maybe you're thinking there could be along that edge. It's based on the actual house footprint, not, squeezing it up as much as possible.
We'll get to you in a minute, ma'am. You're allowed the next question yet, or is that coming up?
We should wait probably for public testimony.
Public testimony. We'll get you a public testimony. Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom zooming in?
We have 2 individuals on Zoom right now. One is currently listening, hasn't decided whether they will speak. The other individual has not yet chimed in.
Okay. So we'll move on. Public testimony. If you would like to testify this evening, please indicate your interest by raising your hand in the Zoom meeting or stating your name in the chat. We added to the list of speakers. Everyone interested in speaking will have the opportunity to do so. All of it is needed out of respect for the speaker. As a reminder, you will have 3 minutes. And please state your name and mailing address for the record. So we're going to go on to the presentation of the proponents. Anyone that would like to speak in favor of this? Presentation of homes. Is there anyone that would like to speak against this?
The whole neighborhood.
Okay, well, one at a time, we're all adults, come up, state your name, you got 3 minutes, I got the timer.
It's Mario. Well, thank you guys for hearing us out. And so, you know, me and my family live on the end of Oak Street.
Throw your name out there.
Oh, sorry, Andrew Hansen. We live on 1303 Oak Street, right across the street from where it's going in. And so, of course, we have some concerns, many. The housing density itself, emergency exits, you know, should things go south. Oak Street has one in and one out. The other thing I would say is, you know, on their traffic study, they did it in 2020. The schools were all completely shut down. A lot of us weren't working. You know, I think that at very least needs updated. You know, at 36 houses, that's what, on average, probably at least 70 cars, you know, figuring the 2 working adults, not to mention any kids driving. You know, trade, nursery on a 99, that all gets very busy, especially in the school hours and, you know, early morning afternoons, we all are very aware. You know, I'd be concerned, and, you know, I'm not gonna knock our fire code at all, they're amazing, but that's a lot of very tight houses. You know, if one goes, are the rest gonna go? You know, same with law enforcement. If something happens out there, you know, our law enforcement already is limited. You know, so we'd have to probably bring in another officer. The schools themselves, you know, that's a lot more kids potentially. And with their land donation with the city, I would have a question on that. You know, is the city at that point going to be tasked with removing the briars, keeping up on all of that? You know, just curiosity. And, you know, like their park, their all this stuff they're bringing on. And I was looking at the park, unless I'm reading the map wrong, it's the size of a postage stamp. I personally love to see, you know, houses with actual yards, you know, people can have a small garden, you know, where it's more of the, you know, how Amity is, you know, where the kids actually have a yard to play in. But, you know, that's up to you guys to do. You know, they're talking to all these, you know, 6-foot high privacy fences, they don't stop noise. And I think that's about all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I'm Cassandra Hake, also representing my husband, Brian Hake. We live at 1302 Oak Street, but mailing address is P.O. Box 6 in Amity. But I live in that little corner property that is next to the access way, but also abuts number 27, which I'm afraid is not more than, that is too close to our property, quite frankly. We know that a lot of this is already mentioned because there's codes and stuff because it's a PUD. However, we would like all of that thrown out personally. First of all, is we were not provided with a map that has the sizes for the dimensions. I know that was provided to the city, but it was not provided to the homeowners that are close by. The minimum lot area, as is mentioned, for an R1 or R2 is 7,000 square feet. Since the dimensions are not shown, we have since been told that it's 3,500 approximately. And all the setbacks on the sides are also not within code, including the one that is next to our property, number 27. We would like to see the codes upheld personally, which would, yes, diminish the properties that can be built. As well as one of the side properties is only 12 feet from Oak Street and should be 15. I would like it brought up that the previous owner of the subdivision had those studies done, and this current owner knew before he purchased this property that 3/4 of the property was unusable. So in order to fit that all in, our tiny little neighborhood should not be required to suffer that amount of vehicles and people on a dead end narrow road. It does not have other accessible streets to the area. They talk about adding a street, but there's still no side access. They're in an emergency. We have possibly 85 vehicles leaving a one block area of Oak Street all at one time. The same thing with mornings, and I agree with Andy. Whenever they did their study, it was obviously not during school hours. I would like to recommend that any of you who don't already take your children to school, go between 7:45 and 8 o'clock and try to cross Nursery. Try to cross Church Road. Try to get out on 99W from Church. I can sit there for 5 minutes now just to cross Nursery to get my kids to school. Add another 72 vehicles, possibly. I cannot imagine how long it would take. And they wouldn't want that either. I would also like it noted that I don't know about, it is my understanding that R1 does not allow duplexes, but numbers 19 and 20 and 21 and 22 have literally 0 setback, which to my understanding means it's a duplex, which is not allowed for R1. I would like that brought up and hopefully addressed. Also, I would like it noted, I know the fire department has already looked at this, but if there was a fire on any numbers between 21 to 27, and the fire department, there are fire trucks there, or an emergency vehicle, any other emergency vehicles, none of those homes could be, they would not have access to leave their properties. So I would like to propose that 27 be taken out completely and have another accessory road added there that would connect to the T.
That's fine.
Okay.
Two. Sorry, if you've got written testimony, just turn that in.
Yes.
You didn't actually sell them. Okay, next.
Michael Blanco, P.O. Box 485, Amity. I had a couple questions. Is there anyone on this panel who's opposed to this? Okay.
Whatever you're asking us to take a decision before we've heard everything.
Well, you said you might make a decision tonight. Doesn't that imply that you thought about this? And that you might actually have an opinion of whether you want it or not by tonight before you vote on it? Is what we're going to say here tonight going to change that? Or is that what you're telling me?
I'm not telling you, but it's in our interest to make a decision based upon what we hear tonight.
Ah, okay, then that's what I was asking. That's what I want to know. Second question. Do any of you know how many teachers the school district plans on adding to handle the additional burdens on the schools? Okay. You know, I've been in Amity a while, and when I came here, there were no traffic congestion, no rush hours, where you couldn't even cross the road for minutes at a time. We are drowning in development. You are truly in Amity with this kind of development, especially something as, regardless of how legal it might be. And I admit, I didn't bring my packet with me to address what might be on subsection C, page 33, paragraph C. So I don't have all those details, but you're drowning us in this kind of development. The fact that you're letting agricultural land, maybe not attracted to a corporation or something, but agricultural land, the true value in the Willamette Valley, go to this. Kind of reminds you of that old song, paved paradise and put up a parking lot. It's too many. Do you know how many people in Amity want this? Have you actually asked them beyond the people who showed up tonight? And even if you took a vote and Amity said no, do you have the legal authority to tell the developer no? Because I know that's what happened in Carlton. They didn't want developments. They couldn't tell the developers no, they had to let them in, and they suffered years of burdens on their infrastructure, on their resources, and suddenly having so much crowds of cars and everything that the peaceful, beautiful little community of Carlton is pretty much ruined. And my father-in-law was the city manager. That's why I'm saying this. This is not going to help us. Southern Amity, I don't like Southern Amity. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was harking back to an older America that is gone.
It's time, thank you.
It is time. You're right.
Next. Come on up, ma'am.
My name is Joan Hay. I live at 1304 South Hope. I'm part of the dead end. My mailing address is P.O. Box 6. I obviously have the same concerns as everyone else with traffic and everything else, but I'm coming at this from a little different perspective. If you look on the map, the south side of my property is going down to Ash Swale. That is just full of blackberry vines, and I'm having to go out all the time to get this cut back and sprayed. So is this organization, since how they own that property, are they going to be required to help keep those down? Because they are encroaching. My other question was, I think I heard him say that they would be putting up 6-foot fences. I wasn't quite clear on the back of my property, mine up against 26 because of that. Whatever that is, that proposed front yard getting back. Would I qualify for a fence through there? I didn't quite understand.
I think this is all over the answer questions.
Okay, so anyway, I am requesting that we have a 6-foot fence. Plus the west side and the north privacy fence on the side.
Could you repeat your question? I really didn't hear it.
I wasn't quite sure what he said. I live on the plot there that's back up against 26, and my son is against 27. And I'm just asking that a 6-foot privacy fence be put through there. I think I heard something about a 6-foot fence, but I couldn't hear it clearly. And then along the north side of that same plot. And then the berry vines being taken care of on that property. Thank you.
Next.
Hello, I'm Desiree, and I'm also standing in with my husband Brian. We live on 303 Ketchum Avenue. We've lived here for about 10 years. And I don't know if this quite affects us, but I've heard that you might widen the roads there down Oak. And if so, I thought I heard her say about 66 feet. If that were so, and if that included sidewalks, you would be actually hitting into our house. And we were concerned about that. And I was also concerned about the 72 cars thereabouts going up and down Oak. I see kids walking down, because on one side of the street, we don't have a sidewalk, and they usually just walk inside of the road anyway. And I see sometimes people flying down that road, and I worry about the children, like, what are you gonna do about that when there's like 72 more cars going down Oak Street? And there's people that will just race down that road because it's paved. We're the only ones. And if you were to take up people's property like that, what are you gonna do to compensate us? Are we gonna have to pay for the sidewalks? I don't think that's fair if you're gonna have somebody who comes in to do a development like that. And if you were to take up some of my property, am I allowed to put a 6-foot fence up? Because like I said, that's right up against our house. Yeah, I'm mostly just concerned about the roads and the kids and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Oh, and I suggest speed bumps through Oak if you can do that.
Okay, next.
My name is Alyssa Straley. I live at 1217 Oak Street, directly across from, I guess that would be number 1 and 2 there. A lot of my concerns have been covered, but a lot of my concerns as well are the pedestrians. So this is going to be family unit. So, you know, say they have 1 kid per household, that's 36 kids a day walking up and down the street that has 1 length of sidewalk, on one side and 2 blocks down by church has another one, the sidewalk. I mean, where are they supposed to be? And, you know, there's vegetation that comes in off of one lot that is in the roadway. I mean, that could be cleared, sure, but I mean, where are the pedestrians gonna go? Like if my son rides the bus to the middle school and I walk down there to pick him up every day, it's already crazy getting between the cars and everybody racing around. Kids walking up both sides of the street, cars going up and down the middle of the road, stopping, having to take turns like it's one-way traffic because where are the kids supposed to be? I mean, I just see that as being a safety hazard, especially with the influx of traffic. It's going both ways. Certainly, you know, at school times or school let out and beginning, there's more. I mean, the neighbor's daughter rides her bike to school every day. The hates boys, I see them run home every day after school. I mean, and that's all the way down to the end. That's not just, that's already, that's, you know, without this development being there. So yeah, and then where the intersection is at Roth and Oak would essentially be a 1-lane road until you get past that first parcel and then it widens out. I mean, you can't even get down the road if the garbage man is down there. You wait your turn, wait for him to get off the road or you're going through grass. So that's another concern I see would be a problem at that intersection. And then do you put in stop signs on Oak Street on both sides? How are people on Roth supposed to get out? I mean, I don't know. I could just see some issues with the influx of numbers down there, really, and how would that all be mitigated and the safety of, you know, the pedestrians as well. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration. But other than that, they've covered a lot of my other stuff. So, thank you.
My name is Gail Holt. I live at 1109 South Jellison, box 42, Kelly. I also own the rest of Roth Court, which Roth Avenue becomes a private driveway that is our property. So 1 block off the subdivision. Several of the same concerns, certainly. I know that planning commissions don't have to consider water needs, but when Amity sometimes has water problems, I think of 36 more houses that would have additional problems, and maybe we would too. The number of students, the number of cars, all of that. And then also because our house was built in 1870, it was a 3-acre piece at that time. In 1988, when the owner bought it, we bought it in 99, and he added 6 more mobile homes all around it, and the little shared driveway that is sometimes problematic, and some minimum lot sizes and some funny shaped lots. And so I've seen how that goes when you end up with flag lots or lots that aren't the 7,000 square feet recommended. So I would have the planning commission uphold that code to those lot sizes. The 4-foot setback doesn't really work when you need 5 or you need emergency vehicles. Right now, we're going to be fighting with Ziply because there's a new internet telephone box in the middle of our shared driveway. Just right last week. So the lot size, setbacks, certainly all of that. The need for dark sky and more lighting that up above doesn't need. If you add more street lights and such, little parks. Also, that hopefully, if this ever goes through, that the percentage of the homes would be low-income subsidized housing, so that it would match the people who live in Amity. I'm a retired school teacher from Perrydale, and I've seen a lot of need for families that can't even make our water bill every month. So certainly consideration. And that if this subdivision goes through, we're working with this little narrow Oak Street dead end, that the builder would have to come back and repave and repair any damage when you have that many trucks bringing construction materials up and down. I've seen in other parts of Amity, and certainly it would be the same on Oak. So all of those things, I'll give it in as written also. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name's Mike McLean. I live on 1007 Jellison. My PO box is Minville 1197. I just have a couple of concerns. I've lived down there for 45 years. I know the water lines haven't been improved, sewer lines haven't been improved since I've been there, the roads haven't been paved. I'm concerned on, you put that many homes in that area. What, because you got to put a pump down there, pump it back into our system. What it's gonna do to the rest of our houses, if we had a blockage. It was last year, this time. Because of the COVID and everybody being at home, we had backup. I don't want backup again. So, and I know you guys have been working on something, especially water, but not maintaining, the water lines are old and I know they're not gonna put up for more pressure. And the other thing that I didn't hear through all this was an environmental study. Has anybody done an environmental study of the runoff from them homes into ash soil? You know, if you got that pond or containment down there, they're gonna do samples on it every so often to see, make sure it's not getting zinc and oils and other things in it. I mean, there's a lot more to than just building houses and bringing in for the community. And I know Dan knows they haven't done any improvements down that way. Especially, my road hasn't been paved since I lived there. And it's narrow, like everybody thought, just like oak. You put a garbage truck on there, you gotta wait. Well, right now, we gotta wait to go buy 2 cars. And every time they make an improvement on somebody's water meter, they come dig the road up. Now you're not driving straight down the road, you're going zigzag down the road. So it hit the ruts. But I just don't want to buy.
Thank you. Next, anyone else?
Mary Jackson, you had a question earlier. Did you still want to speak?
Well, the question has to do with, I don't understand how they get all these homes, do they build them all at the same time? Because they're getting different loans for different families. So the question was directed towards him. Because I didn't understand if you have, where the loans are coming from, they're assisting them to get some kind of government backed loan to assist them. So does the project have to end at a certain time, or does it go on for 20 years, 10 years? You know, when does the building stop?
I think at this point, this is just an application for subdivision. This isn't approving any house subdivision or anything.
Maybe the applicant could address that in a rebuttal.
Okay.
Yes, that question. So we typically build 10.
Okay, anybody else want to come up to the podium and be in a phone? Come on up, sir.
My name is Jesse Johnson. I live at 21155 right off 99 there. I guess my concern also would be environmental. There's been any studies or anything with the runoff to the ash well and with the stormwater facility that's there. As far as also brush management and just any of that with being that close to the floodplain and water. So go ahead.
Anyone else?
I forgot to mention one thing.
I know the rest of my time.
Sorry.
Just wanted to mention the equipment and not blocking the road.
All right, so no more opponents. Are there any testimony of neutral parties, including government bodies, with which to speak?
Real quick, I do want to say we have written testimony that's submitted, which we included in the opponent category.
Oh, that's right. That does that need to be read, or we both read it? Does it need to be read? Read it.
If there are any, okay. So the city of Amity received written comments submitted by Brian Haight. I know this evening we've heard from Sandra Haight. I'm just going to skim it to see if there are any issues that we haven't heard this evening. So there's concern about, density. The reduced setback. The number of houses on Oak. The traffic in the morning. And then the portions of the road that are not included in the project. So his request is that the city follows the normal lot sizes and spacing requirements in order to maintain the small town feel. And then they do request a security fence around the bordering properties.
I did have one more thing, and how long is it for our property?
So. Read that in, now we have no testimony from the neutral parties. And now we have the rebuttal of the applicant, he can answer the questions that have been proposed to him.
So I tried to keep track of all the comments. I appreciate everything that the neighbors have said. This is how these processes work, is that they give you feedback and take that into consideration for the decision. And this applicant does want to be a good neighbor and is taking their own notes in the back of the room. So I wanted to mention that as far as density goes, there's a limited amount of flexibility that we have because we do have a minimum density that needs to be met for the site. You could build 33 homes, you know, or more than that is actually required under the standard zoning. But that would mean a number of the homes would be in the floodplain and on steep slopes. But there is still a minimum density that needs to be met for this zone. So you know, the applicant could build 49 apartment units on the site. There's a variety of different housing types that can be developed as a PUD, but that doesn't fit their mission. It's home ownership. They want to promote home ownership, so they're proposing a 36 lot subdivision that is including single family homes. There were questions about perimeter privacy fences. Yes, that would be included around the perimeter of the site, including lot 26. There was a question about that, I believe. You know, as far as traffic concerns on Oak Street, we certainly understand those. You know, the applicant does have limited frontage along that stretch. There are a number of properties north of the site that could be redeveloped in the future. They're oversized lots. Sometimes these things do take time for improvements in one location to be extended. And that might have to happen in this case. But the applicant is certainly open to, you know, suggestions, or you know, if there were a requirement for speed bumps, for instance, to slow traffic, I think this applicant would be amenable to that. There were questions about, you know, equipment and contractors damaging streets. Those type of things should be addressed in the conditions of approval, and the applicant would be required to address issues like that during construction so that they don't compromise access for the neighbors. And then the environmental concerns. This project is pursuing funding from HUD, and the federal requirements for funding are very stringent when it comes to environmental issues. So there's going to be a requirement to do above what's required at the city for stormwater quality management, stormwater management in tract A. So our track fee. And they will need to make sure that they filter and provide water quality in that facilities before it is discharged into the creek to meet the federal standards, not the city standards. So those issues are certainly going to be addressed. Were there any follow-up questions that you guys might have at this point that we can answer?
The question regarding the process of building, you were about to address it, man. And we,
Yeah, I think maybe it'd be best if you came up to discuss that one.
Before you leave, the question about the traffic study. Somebody raised the issue of time that is done is actually not representative of the stress on the traffic, because I guess the school was not in session because of COVID. I don't know if that was focused on. So any thoughts about that?
I was not involved in that portion of the project, but I do know that the city scoped that study. It was at the city's direction of how that study occurred. And the former property owner followed that methodology.
And the other question I had, and maybe it's more directed to the city, is was part of the analysis of this project directed towards the stress on the sewer system. Right.
defer to the city engineer.
Yeah, Jesse Fields with Keller Associates, we're the contracts engineer for the city of Amity. And back in, I want to say it's 2019 or 2020, the applicant did the sit down pre-application conference like all I discussed, and the sewer was one of the concerns that we had, primarily with one of the pump stations, the Jellison pump station, that I believe one of the neighbors over there was talking about. There was a backup. There was a pump that failed and was running below its capacity. Since then, that pump has been rebuilt, and we're actually setting up an appointment to confirm that capacity has been restored. But it was supported.
Who's the Jellison pump?
Jellison goes to the Oak Street pump station. So everything that drains to the Jellison pump station goes to the Oak Street pump station, and then pumps over to the headward. Say that again?
I said, so when that pump fails again, not the most gonna come back in and go.
No, the Jellison pump station was the one that had.
Yeah, I know that was gonna fail,
Right.
but if it fails again and they're hooked together, it's gonna back load.
Well, the Jellison pumps to the Oak.
Yeah,
And
that's
the
what I mean.
Oak hasn't had problems.
No, but that's what I mean, when that pump's not working or it's low standard, you're gonna have a flow come back into it.
Right, so the way the pump stations are run is there's redundancy, so every pump station in City Amity has 2 pumps. And we look at the design flows, for the area, for how much area is built out. And there's actually 2 pumps that can provide that full capacity, so when a pump goes down, you have another backup.
So what you're telling me, there's no check valve.
No, yeah, there's check valves, yes, on the dischargeable pumps before they come together. Yeah.
I know that.
Okay, thank you. Does the staff have any further comments or clarifications regarding this application?
Yes, wanted to answer the question about the reduction of those, sorry.
My name is Teresa Smith. I live at 11105 Southeast Clear Lane in Dayton. We typically build 10 homes. So the families, we have 1 construction supervisor and an assistant, and families in charge of building. It could possibly be a 3-year project. Not necessarily.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll go back to does the staff have any further comments or clarifications regarding that?
Yes, we do. We defer to Holly in a second. I will say that At this time, the water system, because of the expansions we're doing currently, the project that's underway right now, that is complete, it will have the capacity to handle the new housing, so the water system will be able to handle this. The sewer system, according to the engineers, will handle this growth, but not much more after that, unless we start a sewer renovation project in the next couple of years. So this is likely to be one of the last large-scale developments that would be able to go in with the current sewer system. Be that as it may, whether this project goes in or not, the city does have a wastewater facilities planning survey that is going to be briefed to the city council the first day of February at our regular city council meeting, that will explain what sewer upgrades will be needed to carry the city forward for the next 20 to 30 years, and what those projects will undertake. Some of those will be renovating and improving the pump systems, expansion of the sewer lift stations, and et cetera, are all being considered at this time, and those will be presented to council on the February 1st meeting. So we are looking at the sewer system and at the water the system, but at this time both can handle this current amount of growth. Beyond that, I may defer to Polly who had a bunch of other questions or comments.
So I made a bunch of notes while we had testimony, and I'm gonna put Jesse back in the hot seat for a minute if I could. So questions for Jesse. There was a question about are we gonna build a street in my yard? And I just wanted to make sure we all understand that the public right-of-way is where the street improvements are. My understanding is that Oak is a collector, it has to be 66. Within that 66-foot right-of-way on the applicant's side, there's gonna be 8 feet they're dedicating. There's gonna be a sidewalk, curb gutter, and then the paved street will be 44 feet, I believe is 3/4. And that's all gonna be within public right-of-way, so we don't need any more property on the other side.
No, and even and I have to look at the numbers, and we can't require the applicant to donate property that is theirs. So only property that is within the applicant's property would be donated as right of way. So no existing property lines where, that are not the applicant's property would be adjusted to that. That can't happen. So that dedication is from the center line into the development property.
So there's no plans on upgrading the infrastructure to the road that actually goes down to development, except for where they decide to put it in, right? So only at the beginning of their development will there actually be infrastructure improvement.
Right, the way development pays for itself and frontage improvements for it, you're right, it can only be along the length of their frontage along that street, so that they don't.
Another question was about runoff. And my understanding is that Amity stormwater standards in the Amity Public Works Design Standards document, which was adopted in 2021, requires quantity and quality.
Right, so yeah, so quantity and quality. So quality is treatment, for lack of a better word, and what that is typically a low impact development approach like a pond, where you're sending runoff from dirty surfaces, potentially roadways, roofs, that sort of thing. You're sending that all to a bioswale. Essentially, you send it to a swamp, right? And then there's bugs and bacteria that kind of break that stuff down. It sits there for a long period of time, and then it goes out and slowly through that system and filters through the bioswale before it's discharged out to ash swale. That's the quality portion of it. The quantity portion is flow reduction. So when you develop, land that was previously natural land, increase the amount of runoff, right? You have more water rushing, potential for flooding downstream. So the requirement is to develop this big basin that holds that water, and then there's flow restriction orifices in an outlet structure that reduces the amount of flow so that it mimics the same amount of flow that was coming off of that property prior to development. So that pond is doing both of those things. It's doing water quality and water quantity. And the applicant submitted that for review, and we reviewed that against our design city's design standards. And we provided comment on that as well.
Thank you. Okay. one other thing, there was concern about large construction vehicles being outside of the project. What do the Amity Public Design Standards say about that? Do we have any protection for existing facilities?
I would have to go and look, but exactly what it says about that, if it says anything. I will say contractors in general, if they break something, usually they fix it to better than it was. Especially if you have, the city or people, if there's anything that you see that they do, that sort of thing, reporting is part of that. But I would have to go and look and see if there's any actual team that we, have to look on.
There were new signs just that had no vehicle above 10 tons in our neighborhoods. So I would guess 90% of their vehicles are gonna be above that. If they're hauling anything.
Are those signs related to this project? The 10-ton weight limit on Jefferson Road?
No, ma'am, the 10-ton weight limits were put out in response to a city ordinance that had been in place since I believe 2017, 2018 timeframe. And due to other priorities, we finally got around to getting the sign mounted onto the side there. But the ordinance has been in place for quite some time.
How does the garbage?
There are exceptions for moving trucks, garbage trucks, compact trucks, and certain delivery vehicles that can be exempted from that ordinance. The main reason for those were to prohibit routine use by semi-tractor trailers, wheelers, logging trucks, and other large container trucks you'd see usually typically going up and down like that.
When Google Maps sends somebody down and actually have to turn on Roth Avenue and go back down to. And it's a matter.
Google it, that's.
But I live right there, I've gone out a couple times with a big light pole. Like that.
There was just one other clarification I wanted to make. There were concerns about duplexes, and I just wanted to explain the difference. So a duplex is when you have 2 units on one lot, whereas the houses, the 0 lot lines that are proposed are actually attached single family. So there are 2 single family houses side by side. If there were more, we would call them townhouses or townhomes. So in this case, these houses are on their own lots. There's a lot line down the middle, and then there's a firewall in between. So
Is that an outright permitted use in the R1 zone?
in a PUD code, residential uses generally are allowed, and so there's no limits necessarily on what types of residential uses. Once again, they probably could have proposed a lot more intensity in that regard, but. I think those are all the clarifications I had in response to testimony, but I'm happy to answer any questions or, pull Jesse back in the hot seat, that's fine.
So could you do a little more PUD 101 for me?
Yeah.
Folks are talking about the minimum number of units. If it's below the minimum number of units, what would that mean?
If there were no PUD, the applicant would have to provide at least 4 units per gross acre. But the PUD code does not have a minimum density, they only have a maximum. And so we're under that maximum.
So there isn't a minimum.
No.
Earlier question, 35.
Yeah, so the question was about whether the 3,500 was an average, but the 3,500 was the minimum lot size they're requesting. The units, the lots themselves would range between 3,500 and 6,500 ish, but none of them would be smaller than 3,500 square feet.
And I think I asked this before, can the planning commissions require that only a certain number of lots be that size?
You could if you had a reason for doing that, yeah.
I had a question about the road width. Maybe Jessica can answer this. The road width is supposed to be 6 feet and it's not. So at what point would we deny a development? At what size? Because the road is too narrow. So it's an older road, it would go a lot that way.
Yeah, so just a quick clarification, is not the roadway, it's 66 feet, it's the right of way, which is the public, the width of the public track. The pavement was 44 required, and I believe the applicant is going to be providing that. So again, this goes back to, we can't have them dedicate right of way on the opposite side, so they're providing the street width as required.
Yeah, I'm talking about the rest of the road all the way to.
Oh.
The whole road is very narrow. So at what point do we, if somebody was wanting to do an 800 home development, that road just wouldn't support that. So at what point do we say, no, now we'll have to have that road, it's just not big enough?
Yeah, so that, something like that, if you want to, if you took it to the extreme, that would have to change the classification of the road, so then it might go from a collector to an arterial type of road, which would have an even wider section. And that's a good point, is in addition to, the requirements that are here, the traffic impact statement that was done by the applicant's consultant has requirements in there as well for the roadway improvement.
So like at the 800, the TIS would show that it needed more. Does that make sense?
So the requirements that came out of the TIS and made it into the engineering comments were a result of a number of units. That said, now there is potential for a requirement of off-site improvements, if that's something that planning commission and the city need to require, or wanted or saw the need to require that community. They're put out a requirement for off-site improvements, improvements outside of the frontage. Right.
Okay, moving on. Does any member of the commission have any questions for the staff?
I actually had another one, I'm sorry. Could staff comment on the concern that the traffic study was done at a time that didn't take into consideration peak traffic?
Yeah, so that was something that we were kind of having a sidebar if you're talking about when the dates were, and that is definitely something we can go back and look at, is when those traffic counts were done, and if that was a time when there was no school session.
And they find out what time of day too.
Yeah, so usually they take that into account, they look at what the peak time for that.
Can we ask updated traffic study? This might be an answer here. So it says traffic, the 2019 traffic counts were adjusted to current 2020 traffic volumes. Traffic growth rates were estimated based upon a review of the City of Amity TSP, which notes that in developing future years volumes, background traffic growth is based on historical trends as well as most recent ODOT figures. So the TSP was adopted in 2015, so that's presumably when those traffic volumes were based. But they did, I think, also do actual counts.
Yeah, and that's what we were gonna look at, when they're actually out there counting cars, what was the date and time and out there.
Yeah.
That's what we were gonna, yeah.
Any more questions, staff?
Yeah.
You want the.
Okay, go ahead.
So, I'm still curious how the applicant can use a huge tract of land, acres of land. In all the calculations, and then say, but we're gonna give that to another entity. So if we took that out, what do the numbers look like? Do they have enough? I just don't know how you're able to use it in all the calculations to benefit the applicant, and then give it away to also benefit the applicant because they can't get funding. And then I guess it's up to the city council, but I can't believe the city would want this land. It would be a big liability, and the city has historically been trying to get away from owning streets and things that don't benefit. It wouldn't benefit the citizen. It benefits the applicant. I look at that as a liability for the city, and yet the applicant is able to use that in all calculations. And say it's got, 40% green space. Well, the land they're giving away is about 90% of the 40%.
Yeah, yeah. So regardless of who owns that open space, it would be limited to no development. It would be permanently placed into open space recreation purposes.
So would it be just fenced off and a liability that either the homeowner association or the city would have to deal with forever?
And that is, when you're grappling with your comprehensive plan that says we value natural resources, we value open space views, we value keeping development out of the floodplains and off of steep slopes. We aren't assigning dollar values to those, but we know they're important to the city. And just because we can't be there as the public doesn't mean they don't still provide a value.
But should they be used in the calculations that are required when they're going to be given to another dedicated to another entity?
Right. Until there's a requirement for public access to them, they could be. Because your PUD code doesn't require it to be a public space, simply an open space. I know you don't like that answer.
I was part of redoing that. It may have been 20 years ago, but I think the intent was looking more at parks for walking paths or access to schools, or it was going to be land that was going to be used by the community.
Yeah.
Even if it's just the planned unit development. And that is just, you can shrink down the yards, you can shrink down the properties and the setbacks and everything. And you can say, well, within 200 feet, you have this green space, but the green space is actually going to be fenced off, turned into a retention pond for the to go to the city. So I know that when we did this years and years ago, this was not the intent that we had talked about.
And that's important perspective that none of the rest of us have. So that's important that you bring that up. Definitely. And I do stand corrected for the record. Thank you to the applicant. I acknowledge that the tract B is not included in that open space number.
Tract B is not.
The stormwater is not included in the open space. He corrected me in his presentation.
So then basically just about all of the green space is being deeded back to the city.
A large part of it, yeah.
Other than the small part. Square footage on the park.
So P1 and P2, so the small park is P1 on the corner there, and then P2 is the little loop trail there. Just inside track C. City engineer stole my computer, so I'm flying blind right now on that size. Nice feel yours. Thank you. Looks like Perhaps the applicant could answer the question about the exact size of P1 and P2.
P1 is 30,815 square feet. And P2. Just under some of that. So 10K total.
You guess what the percentage would be? We just. We tracks out of it.
Yeah, if you could have the applicant respond, that'd be great.
Sorry, what was the exact question?
So we're curious when tract C is removed from the open space, what the remaining open space figure looks like.
The amount of square feet?
Yeah, or and percentage or what percentage.
Oh, I mean, I haven't done a calculation on the fly, so I don't know exactly, but it's important to note that the code states that tract C can become an open space that's publicly owned or owned by a homeowners association. It says that specifically in the code. Currently, I realize that it might not be what's desired, but still we are reviewing this particular application based on the current code standards. So it's just important to note that. Also, I did look at the traffic impact analysis. I have the full study, and the counts were done on 11/20/19 before the pandemic on a Wednesday. So just so you know that.
From 7 to 9, 7 a.m.
They looked at the peak hour traffic.
They do an evening peak hour also.
That answers the questions of when the study was done prior to COVID.
Yes.
Normal workday.
Yes.
Prior to the holiday, so it wasn't holiday traffic. I still think, Commissioner, you were seeking like a square footage for this.
Well, I was wondering, there's a 20% requirement for green space, and I was wondering if you take out the part of the development, it's not really part of the development. Need it over.
It'll be part of the development. It's part of this application package. It will be owned by somebody else. It's currently owned as part of this site. So when you're evaluating the PUD, it's included as part of that area.
And then Holly,
Yes.
the setbacks,
Yes.
how is our code for a PUD? I'm just concerned when people buy and they put their whole life savings into a property that's in the R1 zone. The benefit of that is you have a little bit bigger lots and a little bit bigger setbacks.
Yes.
And then to have a PUD come in, I'm not really concerned about the setbacks between the new builds. They'll know what they're getting into when they're buying that. But the existing homes, it seems like the setback should be. We should keep that to what the underlying zoning.
My understanding, Commissioner, was actually that the perimeter of the PUD had to follow the setbacks of the underlying zone.
I thought I heard that.
I thought that was in the narrative, but I could be wrong. I'm gonna look to see if I can find that.
So what you're saying is the perimeter lots have to require or have to be in compliance with setbacks?
It says yard setbacks for lots on the perimeter of the project shall be the same as the required for the subject zone. So it sounds like that is the intent of the code, is that around the perimeter, and I've seen this with other codes, the PUD needs to follow the zone, but within the PUD, it can be reduced.
Right.
So is that your question?
That-
Yeah.
That's
So that would be lots 24, 25, 26. 14, 13, 9, 8, and 5.
Well, the only setbacks that are proposed to be reduced is an interior side setback from 5 feet to 4 feet, so that would be lot 27. And then
That's our property, so it's not from the feet.
right. And then the street setback from 15 to 12, and so that would be only on the side of lot 3 and the side of lot 4. So Steve, am I interpreting that correctly? That the only perimeter setbacks that could be impacted by this revelation that we actually need to hold that underlying would be 27, 3, and
So the applicant's not proposing to amend the PUD standard, so
okay.
we will maintain whatever is required as far as setbacks.
Okay.
So what about lots 5, 8, 9, 13, and 14?
Oh, so yeah, 5, you're right, 5 would be side setback, so that would be 5 instead of 4 on the side there, the north side. And then 8, 9, 13, 14, is the assumption there, those are oriented, street is front? It looks like
Yes.
it based upon the
Yes.
footprint, okay. So there's no proposed change to the rear setback there, those would remain the same,
That's correct.
okay.
So the perimeter homes would be the
Yep.
one, so.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to be clear, any of the lots that abut another property outside of PUD have the setbacks in play. You're not asking for any variation.
That's correct, yes. It's just the interior lots.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions? From the commissioners to the staff? No? Okay. Moving on, no, right, request to continue. Does any party request to continue this public hearing? Seeing none, we move directly to close the public hearing. Public hearing portion is now closed. Move on to deliberations, fairly not open discussion, deliberations by the commission. Commission members may also ask additional clarifying questions of staff. Any member of the commission wish to comment or make a motion. Motion options and the recommended motion to the staff.
Well, I guess I'll ask the question again, if we should revisit the fact.
I think if the planning commission would like us to take, now that we've kind of heard all of the concerns and looked at the traffic study and kind of pointed, specifically about, the Oak Street and Jeff Street traffic, which is in addition to just car traffic and safety, and that sort of thing, we could definitely do that.
I would also like to know if the city council, are they okay with taking a tractor?
Glad you asked that question. So we've had this discussion with the city council. They would be open to that proposal as long as all the other conditions and requirements set by the planning commission were met. They would consider the option of taking that land and having it deeded to the city. There would be a lot of conditions placed on that as well. We've discussed some of those and presented them to the developer, such as the HOA would be required to maintain the property. That the liability would be predominantly with the HOA as well. That there would be fencing, which the applicant already mentioned, to keep the public off that area to reduce liability as well as to maintain the open space and cleanliness of the area. And so they are open to the idea of doing so, but they have not committed to that. It's kind of conditional. Part of it is they didn't, the mayor was very clear about not wanting to agree to something and then basically block in the planning commission. But additionally, the developer, he didn't know that that was an option that was available to him and it wasn't taken off the table. So the council's answer was they would consider it, they would potentially take it if it was part of the approval process that it'd be deeded to the city, we would consider it, but it would have to be through a vote of council. It should also be noted that, and the applicant has made this clear, that they deed the property to somebody else. It can be deeded to the city or to another public entity. Theoretically, they can deed it to the school district or another parks district, the county, somebody else, if they so choose, if that's how that system works. But as far as streamlining the process, because it's inside city limits, that's why they came to the city first. It makes sense to deed it to the city if anyone would get deeded the property. I hope that answers your question. It's kind of a delicate gray area because the council being the appeal authority doesn't want to damage the appeal authority by committing to something that you may not want to do as a commissioner.
Something else I'd like to note is that within probably 2 years, maybe 3, middle school will be going away. If that's going to change the traffic, well, kids aren't going to be going west anymore. They're all going to be headed to north. That's pretty tight. It seems we have a lot of questions on. We don't have answers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to proceed.
Yeah. If I could just take one step back about the question about the track C donation. It's still feasible for the planning commission to approve the PUD without the city committing to take the land. The only condition of approval that addresses it is number 20, and it says, should the city of Amity agree to accept, then the city and the applicant will draft an agreement reviewed by the city attorney, which confirms the HOA's obligation to reimburse the city for whoever we contract to maintain that land. So it is feasible for the planning commission to approve the land use application without committing the city to taking that land. That is a city council decision.
Yeah, I know that's their.
Yeah.
Can you remind me why? Oh, sorry. Can you remind me why they would want to do that in the first place? There was so many information around their funding.
Yeah. Yeah, so HUD funding, they can't have any of the floodplain within their development. And even if there's no homes within the floodplain, it's still within the larger.
And that's the only option they have is basically got to get rid of this land somehow.
I don't know what other options they have in terms of entities. I don't know if there are land trusts or.
Basically, it's dead in the water without that.
I don't know. Can the applicant respond to that? Sorry. I don't want to speak of it.
So the applicant's preference is to dedicate it to the city, as stated earlier, but if the track needs to remain as part of the development and not be deeded to a public entity, then HUD funding would not be available. The applicant would need to look at other funding sources. Just makes it more difficult for the project to move forward under the circumstances. So that's why this dedication is requested.
Would it be feasible with other funding sources?
I can't speak for the organization, but this is what they're looking at.
That answered your question.
Is it realistic to think that that could be required to improve Oak Street or widen Oak Street as a requirement? I mean, how honestly, how real is that? That's a lot.
Yeah, so it can kill a project. If you require too many offsite improvements, it can kill a project. And there are limits to what can be required, and I am not well versed in what those are. That is definitely something that I would what are we allowed to require in terms of on-street. I know safety is typically remembered by the name, why those can be required. And so that's again. Directed to the traffic study, that's.
But if there were a safety concern, that would have been brought up in the original traffic study.
It should have.
A concern that would warrant that requirement.
Right. So it should, if that was a concern, that was highlighted in the traffic study, that would have been that was recommended, and that would follow through to our recommended conditions. I was not personally one to review that, so I can speak to exactly what our traffic department typically look at that. But here today, people look at it again.
Note on that, in Oregon land use law, there's a concept of rough proportionality. Where when you're looking at the dollar amount of site improvements that you require of the developer, they need to be roughly proportional to the impact of what's being proposed. And number of trips on that facility. So you can't, for example, require the developer to pave all of Amity would be proportional to the scale of the project. So that's another thing to keep in mind. When we think about offsite improvements.
Do you have a rough idea what the SDCs that would cover the street? Or what money out of the SDCs we could take, like, could we use some of the SDC money to do a street improvement in the near future? Once, I mean, I know that it would be development would be done, all the houses would be built, but then there should be quite a bit of money there. And of course, that money goes towards roads.
Yeah, there's a lot of sticking points with SDC and when and where they can use. Again, that's not my area of discussion, so I don't want to say something out of turn. But that is the general intent of the SDC facility, that those costs that are going by the developers go into a lot of money that the city uses to improve that infrastructure. And that's all of the utilities, water, sewer, streets, stormwater. So again, I would at least I should have that afterwards.
And we can't estimate the dollar amount of what the SDCs agree at this time. It would be, we get that dollar amount closer to, if the project is approved, we get that dollar amount closer to the point where we're actually going to do the construction work.
Right.
Would it be practical to get that dollar amount now?
Yeah, all the construction would have to be done, but the same, you know, if that became a higher priority, there should be quite a bit of SDC money that they feel spent on street improvements. That may be a higher priority.
Do you remember from the streets?
I'm sure.
I know there's. Like, we review that.
I think it's more better around the highway up there.
I have a question, Holly. I know I closed the public comment, but a member of the audience raised their hand. Am I required to call on them or allowed to call on them, or how's that work?
It's up to you, Chair. They shouldn't be bringing new information to the table that the applicant doesn't get to respond to. The applicant should have the last word with their rebuttal.
You have a question or you have a comment?
More question. I was wondering on the traffic study, if it would be possible to add another location. In being on right where Ross Street, you know, on where Oak Street becomes extremely narrow, truly a one-lane road, if we can also get a traffic study at that location, because you still have a house there between the new development and Rock, where that road, it can't be widened unless that property owner gives up, you know, quite a bit of property. So you're gonna have one heck of a pinch point there that is truly one way.
I don't know who sets up the traffic study or what the clarification is for how to do that.
Yeah, I think that so that's at Rock and O is the point of interest. So we're gonna look at that again, correct? That's the direction, right? So we'll look at that and see what it said about that intersection, and that can be a comment that it was new by specifically that.
So with all these questions, how do we proceed, please?
You could take a motion from a commissioner to reopen the public hearing and continue it to the next regular meeting of the. That would give your city engineer time to review your the TIA on this and give you a little more information about traffic. And any other information that you want to see by then.
So I would need to reopen and continue the public hearing. On the embryo PUD and the subdivision. To the next regular.
That's the February 13th.
Second. Should be properly moved. The second is to reopen the public hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
So, we have a sense of. Yeah.
I gotta read some of that. Okay.
We've pretty much done that. We've pretty much done that with the motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
We confirm for the folks in attendance here what just happened.
So we just reopened the public hearing. We moved out of continuance, so we'll have to make a decision at the next scheduled meeting after we get some more information. I don't know how long it takes to get traffic.
And we're gonna review the existing one and potentially provide additional comment. How long it would take the applicant to turn that around, I don't know. So I guess we want, if there is comments that warrant a revision, we not want to after that revision is reviewed by us. I don't know how long we want it to go.
Why don't we reconvene in February and see where we're at that point?
That works.
Okay. So it seems like it's both the TIA and maybe the TSP also. Think of what those projects.
Yes.
Right, so now where do I go from there?
So typically when a public hearing is continued, there's no additional notice sent out to neighbors because the assumption is that you're here and now. So just to confirm, the next meeting will be, it's always the second Monday, so it's gonna be February 13th. And that's a Monday evening at 6:30, same place. Or by Zoom.
Just, so you know, I won't be here.
Oh.
So you know what we need to change it. I don't know if we can, but
Are you able to Zoom it?
my wife,
Zoom, is that an option?
I'm gonna be up in the middle of the test, but I don't know. What we can say.
So just for planning purposes, the 6th would be Monday prior, that is open to you, but that's a week early. The 20th would be the
No, wait, sorry. No, I will be. Okay, I will have the wrong day.
I was gonna say, the 20th is a holiday, so
I'll be here on the 3rd.
okay.
And I can.
We may still have some forum on the 13th.
Okay. So with that, just need a motion to adjourn. Is that everything? No other business? We have a work session. Oh, that's last year.
You're already.
Take a motion to adjourn. Second adjourn. We are adjourned at 8:48.
Also want me to invite you all to the work session, goal setting session that they're having January 28th.
Okay.
They're gonna go over all their goals, and they maybe did more than over that, and that was easy to all. January 28th, 8 AM, the fire. And that is open to the public.
It's the council rule setting, the overall,
So, I'm sorry, I missed the January 28th, what's that
January
date?
28th, 8 a.m. Also now that, as well,
And what's happening then?
It's the council is going over all of their rules for the next